The rain drummed against the windows of the black luxury car as it pulled into the parking lot of an old diner. Inside the car sat a woman who could buy anything in the world, yet she felt completely empty. Her name was Victoria, and she was worth more money than most people could imagine. But money couldn't fix what was broken inside her heart. Victoria stepped out of the car, pulling her expensive coat tight against the cold night air. The diner looked nothing like the fancy restaurants she usually visited. The neon sign flickered and the paint on the building was old and chipped. But this place had become her escape from a world that suddenly felt too big and too lonely. 6 months ago, everything changed. Her son David had been driving home from work when another car ran a red light. The crash happened so fast that he never saw it coming. One phone call from the hospital turned her entire world upside down. The doctors tried everything they could, but some things can't be fixed, not even with all the money in the world. David was her only child. He was 28 years old and worked as a teacher because he wanted to help kids learn and grow. Victoria had always been proud of him, even though she didn't understand why he chose a job that paid so little when he could have worked in her company and made millions. Now she would give anything just to hear him laugh one more time. The hardest part wasn't just losing David. It was how alone she felt afterward. Victoria had built a huge technology company from nothing. She employed thousands of people and made decisions that affected millions of lives. But when her son died, she realized that all those people around her weren't really friends. They were employees, business partners, and people who wanted something from her. Her assistant would check on her, but only to ask about work meetings. Her business partners sent expensive flowers with cards that felt cold and formal. The board members gave her time off, but she could tell they were worried about the company's stock price more than her broken heart. Even her neighbors in the fancy building where she lived barely knew her name. Victoria pushed open the diner door and a little bell rang above her head. The warm air smelled like coffee and fresh bread. This was her third time coming here in the past 2 weeks. She had discovered this place by accident during one of her late-night drives when she couldn't sleep. Something about the simple, honest feeling of this place made her feel less invisible. She walked to the same corner booth she always chose, the one where she could sit with her back to the wall and watch the few other customers. There was usually a truck driver eating pie, maybe a night shift worker grabbing coffee, or sometimes a young couple sharing a late dinner. These people lived completely different lives from hers, but their problems seemed more real somehow. The waitress who always served her was named Linda. She was probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Linda never asked too many questions or tried to make small talk when Victoria clearly wasn't in the mood. She would just bring coffee and maybe a piece of pie, even though Victoria rarely ate more than a few bites. Tonight felt different, though. Victoria's phone had been buzzing all evening with messages from work, but she had turned it off. Earlier that day, she had gone through David's apartment to pack up his things. She found a photo album filled with pictures she had never seen before. Pictures of David volunteering at homeless shelters, teaching kids to read, and helping elderly people with their groceries. Her successful, brilliant son had been living a life full of kindness that she barely knew about. Looking at those photos made her realize how much time she had missed with David because she was always working. She had been so busy building her empire that she had forgotten to really know her own son. The guilt felt like a heavy stone in her chest that got heavier every day. Victoria stared out the diner window at the empty parking lot. Her phone sat silent on the table next to her untouched coffee. Tomorrow there would be board meetings and conference calls and 100 people asking for her decisions on things that used to seem important. But tonight, she just wanted to disappear. The strangest thing about grief Victoria was learning was how it made everything else feel meaningless. She could buy a private island or a new company, but she couldn't buy back one more day with her son. She could hire the best doctors in the world, but they couldn't heal the hole in her heart. All her success felt empty when there was no one left who truly mattered to share it with. Linda appeared beside her table with the coffee pot, filling Victoria's cup with fresh, hot coffee. She moved quietly, respectfully, as if she understood that sometimes people come to diners not for food, but for a place to think. Victoria nodded her thanks but didn't look up from the table. Other customers came and went. A police officer grabbed coffee to go. An elderly man sat at the counter reading a newspaper. A young mother fed her toddler while trying to keep him from being too loud. Normal people living normal lives, dealing with normal problems. Victoria envied them all. She thought about David's funeral, which had been attended by hundreds of people. Business executives, politicians, and social media influencers had all come to pay their respects. But most of them barely knew David personally. They came because Victoria was important, not because they would miss her son. The whole event felt like another business meeting where she had to perform instead of grieve. The worst part was how everyone expected her to get back to normal after a few weeks. People would ask how she was doing, but they wanted her to say she was fine so they could stop feeling uncomfortable. They wanted the old Victoria back, the strong, decisive leader who never showed weakness. But that Victoria felt like a stranger now. As the night grew later, the diner became quieter. Victoria found herself thinking about all the nights she had worked late instead of having dinner with David. All the school events she had missed because of important meetings. All the times he had called just to talk. And she had cut the conversation short because she was busy. She pulled out her phone and looked at the last text message David had sent her, just 2 days before the accident. It said, "Love you, Mom. Hope you're not working too late tonight." She had never responded to that message because she had been in back-to-back meetings all day. Now she would give anything to send a reply. The coffee in her cup had grown cold again, but Victoria didn't notice. She was lost in memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, a life where she had a son to call, plans to make, and a future that included the person who mattered most. Now she had everything money could buy, but nothing that money couldn't replace. Linda wiped down the counter for the third time that evening, but her eyes kept drifting to the woman in the corner booth. After 15 years of working at Miller's Diner, Linda had learned to read people like books. Happy customers chatted with their friends. Tired workers gulped their coffee and rushed back to their jobs. Lonely people sat quietly and made their meals last as long as possible. But this woman was different. She'd been coming in for weeks now, always ordering the same thing, black coffee and sometimes a slice of apple pie that she never finished. She wore clothes that probably cost more than Linda made in a month, but she looked sadder than anyone Linda had ever seen. Linda had grown up in this small town, and she knew almost everyone who came through the diner doors. This woman was clearly from somewhere else, somewhere with a lot more money, but money didn't seem to be helping her with whatever was breaking her heart. Tonight, the woman looked worse than usual. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held her coffee cup, and Linda could see tears forming in her eyes. The woman kept looking at her phone, then putting it down like it was too heavy to hold. Something about her reminded Linda of herself during the darkest time in her own life. 3 years ago, Linda's husband Tom had been diagnosed with cancer. The treatments were expensive and painful, and despite everything the doctors tried, he passed away after 8 months of fighting. Linda remembered sitting in hospital waiting rooms, feeling completely alone even when the rooms were full of people. She remembered the way grief made everything feel impossible and meaningless. But Linda had something this mysterious woman seemed to lack. She had a community. When Tom was sick, their neighbors brought meals every day. Friends from church helped with bills when money got tight. Linda's sister moved in for 2 months just to help with the household. Even strangers in town would stop Linda at the grocery store to ask how Tom was doing and offer to help however they could. This woman, despite all her obvious wealth, seemed to have nobody. Linda had never seen her with friends or family. She never talked on the phone or smiled at text messages. She just sat alone with her sadness night after night, as if she was carrying the weight of the world by herself. Linda had tried to give the woman space, thinking that maybe she just needed time to work through whatever was bothering her. But weeks had passed and the woman only seemed to be getting sadder. Linda's mother had always taught her that when someone is drowning, you don't wait for them to ask for help. You throw them a rope. The diner was nearly empty now. The last truck driver had finished his dinner and headed back to the highway. The teenage couple who came in for milkshakes had left holding hands. Even old Mr. Peterson, who usually stayed until closing time reading his newspaper, had gone home for the night. Linda poured herself a cup of coffee and made a decision. She had been watching this woman suffer alone for too long. Maybe it wasn't her place to get involved. But sometimes being human meant taking risks to help other humans. She walked over to the corner booth, coffee pot in hand. "Mind if I warm that up for you?" Linda asked softly. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were red from crying, and she quickly wiped her face with a napkin. "Oh yes, thank you," she said quietly. Linda filled the coffee cup and then did something she had never done before with a customer. She sat down across from the woman in the booth. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," Linda began carefully, "but you look like you're carrying something really heavy. I've been watching you come in here for weeks and you always look so sad. I just wanted you to know that someone notices." The woman stared at Linda in surprise. For a moment, Linda worried that she had overstepped and made a mistake. Rich people probably didn't appreciate waitresses trying to start personal conversations. But then the woman's face crumpled, and tears started flowing down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't mean to bring my problems into your restaurant." "Honey, this isn't just a restaurant," Linda said gently. "This is a place where people come when they need somewhere safe to sit with their thoughts. I've seen a lot of hurting people over the years, and you're hurting more than most." The woman looked down at her hands, which were wrapped around the warm coffee cup like it was an anchor. "My son died 6 months ago," she said so quietly that Linda almost didn't hear her. "Car accident. He was everything to me, and now I don't know how to keep going." Linda's heart broke for this stranger. She reached across the table and gently placed her hand over the woman's hands. "What was his name?" "David. He was 28. He was a teacher." The woman's voice broke on the last word. "Tell me about him," Linda said. "What made him special?" For the next hour, the woman talked about her son. She told Linda about David's love for teaching, his volunteer work, and his gentle heart. She talked about how he used to call her every Sunday just to check in, and how he always remembered her birthday even when she forgot his. She described his laugh and the way he could make her smile even on her worst days. Linda listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions or sharing a memory about her own experiences with loss. She didn't try to fix anything or offer empty promises that everything would be okay. She just listened with the full attention of someone who understood that sometimes the most important thing you can give another person is the gift of being truly heard. As the woman talked, Linda learned that her name was Victoria and that she was incredibly wealthy but had never felt more poor in her life. Victoria explained how isolated she felt, surrounded by people who saw her as a business opportunity rather than a grieving mother. She talked about the guilt she felt for working so much when David was alive, and how she would give up every dollar she had for just one more conversation with her son. "The hardest part," Victoria said, wiping her eyes with a tissue Linda had brought from behind the counter, "is that everyone expects me to be strong. They want me to get back to business as usual, but I don't know how to be that person anymore. I don't even know if I want to be." Linda nodded. "When Tom died, people kept telling me that he would want me to move on and be happy. But I wasn't ready to be happy yet. I needed time to figure out who I was without him. Grief isn't something you get over like a cold. It's something you learn to carry." Victoria looked up with surprise. "That's exactly how I feel. Like I'm carrying something too heavy, but I don't know how to put it down." "You don't put it down," Linda explained. "You learn to carry it differently, and you definitely don't carry it alone." For the first time in weeks, Victoria felt like someone understood what she was going through. This waitress, who she had never really spoken to before tonight, had seen her pain and offered something that all her money couldn't buy: genuine human connection. Linda glanced at the clock and realized it was well past closing time, but she didn't care. This conversation was more important than following rules about when the diner should close. Sometimes the most important work happens when you least expect it. "Can I ask you something?" Linda said. "When was the last time you did something just because it felt right, not because it was good for business or made financial sense?" Victoria thought for a long moment. "I honestly can't remember. Everything in my life has been about strategy and profit for so long." "Maybe that's part of the problem," Linda suggested gently. "Maybe David's death is asking you to remember what really matters. Not the business stuff, but the human stuff." As they sat together in the quiet diner, Victoria realized that this was the first real conversation she had had since David died. For months she had been surrounded by people but felt completely alone. Tonight, a stranger had offered her something more valuable than all her wealth: the simple gift of being seen and understood. Victoria stared at Linda across the small diner table, feeling something she hadn't experienced in months: a tiny spark of hope. This woman, who barely knew her, had listened to her story without trying to fix her or judge her or ask for anything in return. It was such a simple thing, but it felt like a miracle. I don't understand, Victoria said softly. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know who I am. Linda smiled sadly. I know you're a mother who lost her child. That's enough for me to know. And honestly, I've been watching you sit alone here for weeks and my heart has been breaking for you. I couldn't just keep pretending not to notice. Victoria felt tears threatening again. She was used to people wanting something from her. Money, business deals, connections, favors. But Linda's kindness felt completely different. It felt genuine and selfless in a way that Victoria had almost forgotten existed. I've been going to grief counselors, Victoria admitted. The best ones money can buy. But they all feel so clinical, so professional, like they're reading from a script about the stages of grief and the timeline for healing. Nobody talks to me like I'm just a regular person who's hurting. That's because most people don't know how to handle big grief, Linda explained. They want to fix it quickly so they can feel better about it. But grief isn't a problem to be solved. It's a love that has nowhere to go. Those words hit Victoria like a physical blow. A love that has nowhere to go, she repeated. That's exactly what this feels like. I have all this love for David, but he's not here to receive it anymore. Linda nodded. I felt the same way when Tom died. All that love I had for him just sat inside me with nowhere to go. It felt like it was going to burn me up from the inside. How did you handle it? Victoria asked desperately. How did you find a place for all that love? I started looking for ways to honor him, Linda said. Tom loved helping people fix their cars. He was always stopping to help strangers on the side of the road. So I started volunteering with a program that provides car repairs for single mothers who can't afford them. Every time I help someone, I feel like I'm keeping a piece of Tom alive. Victoria wiped her eyes with the tissue Linda had given her. David loved teaching kids. He was always talking about his students, worrying about the ones who were struggling, celebrating when they succeeded. But I was usually too busy with work to really listen. It's not too late to listen now, Linda said gently. What would David want you to do with all that love you have for him? The question hung in the air between them. Victoria had been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't thought about how David would want her to channel her grief. She thought about the photo album she had found in his apartment, full of pictures of him helping others. He would want me to help kids, Victoria said slowly. Kids who need someone to believe in them the way he believed in his students. Then maybe that's where you start, Linda suggested. Not with some big corporate charity thing, but with actually getting to know some kids who need help. David can't teach them anymore, but maybe you can find other ways to be there for them. Victoria felt overwhelmed by the idea. I don't know anything about working with children. I've spent my whole adult life in boardrooms and business meetings. I wouldn't even know where to begin. You start small, Linda said. You start with one kid, or one family, or one small way to help. You don't need to save the world all at once. You just need to take one step toward honoring David's memory. The diner was completely quiet now, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing by outside. Victoria realized that this conversation was changing something fundamental inside her. For months she had been drowning in grief and isolation, but Linda had thrown her a lifeline, not by trying to pull her out of the water, but by jumping in beside her and showing her how to swim. Can I tell you something? Victoria said. I've been thinking about David's life, and I realized that he was happier than I am, even though, I have so much more money. He found meaning in helping other people. I built an empire, but I'm not sure I've ever really helped anyone. Linda leaned forward. Money isn't evil, you know. It's just a tool. The question is what you're building with it. David used his tools, his education, his time, his heart, to build better lives for his students. Maybe you can use your tools to build something that would make him proud. Victoria thought about all the board meetings where she had made decisions based purely on profit margins. She thought about the employees she barely knew, the communities her company operated in but never really connected with, the opportunities she had missed to use her wealth for something meaningful. I've been so focused on making money that I forgot why money matters, she said. It's supposed to be a way to take care of people you love and help others live better lives. But I've been treating it like a game where the goal is just to get more. It's not too late to change that, Linda assured her. Grief can be a teacher if you let it be. It can show you what really matters and what doesn't. Victoria looked around the simple diner with its worn booths and flickering neon sign. 6 months ago, she would never have imagined that the most important conversation of her life would happen in a place like this. But sometimes wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources. Linda, can I ask you something personal? Victoria said. How do you do it? How do you keep going to work every day, serving coffee and taking care of strangers when you've been through such a terrible loss yourself? Linda smiled. Because taking care of people is what gives my life meaning. When Tom was sick, so many people took care of us. Bringing meals, visiting the hospital, helping with bills. I learned that we're all connected, and when one person hurts, we all hurt a little. But when one person heals, we all heal a little too. I've never thought about it that way, Victoria admitted. I've always seen other people as competitors or obstacles or opportunities. I never really saw them as connections. Maybe that's what David was trying to teach you by choosing to be a teacher, Linda suggested. Maybe he was showing you that the real wealth in life comes from the connections we make with other people. Victoria felt something shifting inside her chest. The heavy stone of grief was still there, but it felt different now. Less like a burden and more like a foundation, something solid she could build upon. I want to change, she said firmly. I want to find a way to honor David's memory that actually matters. But I'm scared. I've been living one way for so long, I don't know how to be different. Linda reached across the table and squeezed Victoria's hand. Change is scary for everyone, but you don't have to change everything at once. You just have to be willing to take the first step. And you don't have to take it alone. For the first time since David's death, Victoria felt like she wasn't completely alone in the world. She had found an unexpected friend in this kind waitress who had seen her pain and chosen to care. It was the beginning of something new. Not just healing from her grief, but discovering who she could become when she stopped hiding behind her wealth and started connecting with her humanity. 2 weeks after that life-changing conversation at the diner, Victoria found herself standing outside Jefferson Elementary School, her heart pounding with nervousness. She had called the principal that morning and asked if they needed any volunteers. She didn't mention her wealth or her company. She just said she was someone who wanted to help kids learn. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, had sounded surprised but pleased. We always need reading volunteers, she had said. Can you come in this afternoon? Now Victoria stood at the school entrance feeling more nervous than she had before any business presentation. She was wearing simple clothes, jeans and a sweater, instead of her usual expensive suits. For the first time in years, she wanted to blend in rather than stand out. Linda had encouraged her to start small, and this felt very small indeed. Victoria would be reading to second graders for 1 hour twice a week. It wasn't solving world hunger or ending poverty, but it was something David would have approved of. Mrs. Rodriguez met Victoria in the main office. She was a warm woman in her 50s who had been teaching for over 20 years. Thank you so much for volunteering, she said. We have 15 kids in Mrs. Thompson's class who could really use some extra attention with their reading. As they walked down the hallway, Victoria could hear the sounds of children learning, voices reciting the alphabet, laughter from a playground, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum floors. It reminded her of visiting David's classroom once years ago when he had first started teaching. She remembered how his face had lit up when he talked about his students. Mrs. Thompson's classroom was bright and colorful, with drawings covering the walls and books scattered everywhere. The children looked up curiously as Victoria entered. They ranged in age from 7 to 8, and their faces showed a mixture of excitement and shyness at meeting someone new. Class, this is Miss Victoria, Mrs. Thompson announced. She's going to be reading with us today. A little girl with pigtails raised her hand. Are you famous? She asked innocently. Victoria smiled. No, I'm just someone who likes stories. What kind of books do you like to read? For the next hour, Victoria sat in a small chair that was clearly designed for children, reading picture books to groups of 3 or 4 kids at a time. She helped a boy named Carlos sound out difficult words. She listened to a girl named Amy read an entire book about dinosaurs. She answered dozens of questions about everything from why the sky is blue to whether elephants can swim. It was exhausting and wonderful and completely different from anything Victoria had done in years. These children didn't care about her bank account or her business achievements. They cared about whether she would listen to their stories and help them with words they didn't know. One little boy named Tyler was struggling more than the others. He had been held back a year and was clearly frustrated with reading. While the other children worked on their assignments, Victoria sat with him in a simple book about a dog. I'm stupid, Tyler said quietly when he couldn't read a word. That's what my dad says. Victoria's heart broke for this child who reminded her so much of the students David used to worry about. "You're not stupid, Tyler. Reading is hard work and you're still learning. Every time you try, you get a little bit better." She spent extra time with Tyler, helping him sound out each word slowly and celebrating every small success. By the end of the session, he had read an entire page by himself. His face glowed with pride when Victoria told him how well he had done. Walking back to her car after that first day, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with making money. She thought about David and how he must have felt after days like this, knowing he had made a difference in a child's life. That evening, Victoria drove to Miller's Diner for her regular coffee with Linda. But tonight felt different. Instead of sitting alone with her grief, she had something hopeful to share. "How did it go?" Linda asked as she slid into the booth across from Victoria. "It was amazing," Victoria said, and realized she meant it. "These kids are so full of life and curiosity. There's this one little boy, Tyler, who struggles with reading but tries so hard. When he finally read a whole page by himself, I almost cried." Linda smiled. "That's what David felt like every day, isn't it? Watching kids grow and learn and succeed?" Victoria nodded. "I kept thinking about him the whole time. How much he would have loved these children. How proud he would be that I was there. For the first time since he died, I felt like I was doing something he would approve of." Over the following weeks, Victoria's twice-weekly visits to Jefferson Elementary became the highlight of her schedule. She rearranged business meetings and conference calls to make sure she never missed her reading time. The children began to look forward to seeing her, and she found herself thinking about them even when she wasn't at school. Tyler became especially important to her. His home life was difficult. His father worked 2 jobs and was often stressed and impatient. His mother had left when Tyler was very young. The boy was angry and sad much of the time, but Victoria saw past his tough exterior to the smart, sensitive child underneath. She started bringing Tyler books to take home, and small rewards when he completed reading assignments. More importantly, she listened to him talk about his feelings and his dreams. He wanted to be a scientist when he grew up, he told her, because scientists get to discover new things every day. "My dad says college is for rich kids," Tyler confided one afternoon. "He says I should just plan on working in a factory like him." Victoria felt a surge of protective anger. "Tyler, being smart isn't about being rich. It's about being curious and working hard. You're one of the smartest kids I know." She began to see how her wealth could be used in ways that really mattered, not through big, flashy donations that would get her name on buildings, but through small personal interventions that changed individual lives. She quietly paid for Tyler's family's rent when they fell behind. She bought new books for Mrs. Thompson's classroom. She arranged for a reading specialist to work with the children who needed extra help. But the most important change was happening inside Victoria herself. For years, she had measured her worth by her net worth. Success meant bigger profits, larger market share, more impressive quarterly reports. Now she was learning to measure success differently. Success was Tyler reading an entire book without help. Success was Amy deciding she wanted to be a teacher like her favorite volunteer. Success was the moment when a shy child finally felt confident enough to read out loud to the class. Victoria also began to understand something about grief that the expensive counselors had never explained. Her love for David didn't have to disappear just because he was gone. She could channel that love into caring for other people's children, other people's dreams, other people's hopes for the future. Linda had been right. Grief was love, with nowhere to go. But now Victoria was finding places for that love to flow. Every child she helped, every small kindness she offered, every moment she chose connection over isolation was a way of keeping David's spirit alive. The transformation wasn't complete yet. Victoria still had days when the grief felt overwhelming. She still struggled with guilt about the years she had been too busy to really know her son. But now she had something to build toward instead of just something to recover from. One evening, as she sat in the diner with Linda, Victoria reflected on how much had changed since that first night when Linda had chosen to reach out to a grieving stranger. "I've been thinking about what you said," Victoria told her friend, "about how we're all connected, and when one person heals, we all heal a little. I think I'm finally starting to understand what that means." Linda squeezed her hand. "David would be so proud of who you're becoming." Victoria smiled through her tears. For the first time since her son's death, she believed that might actually be true. 1 year after that first conversation at Miller's Diner, Victoria stood in front of a brand new building with a simple sign that read, David's Learning Center. It wasn't the largest or most expensive building she had ever funded, but it was the most meaningful. Today was the grand opening, and she felt both nervous and proud in ways she had never experienced before. The Learning Center was everything David would have loved. It offered free tutoring for struggling students, after-school programs for kids whose parents worked late, and summer camps focused on reading and science. But most importantly, it was built around the idea that every child deserves someone who believes in them. Tyler stood beside Victoria, now 9 years old and reading at grade level. He had been the first child she thought of when planning the center. His father had initially been suspicious of Victoria's help, but when he saw how much his son's confidence had grown, he became one of her biggest supporters. Miss Victoria, Tyler said, tugging on her sleeve. When do we get to see the science lab? Victoria smiled. Tyler's love for science had only grown stronger over the past year. She had arranged for him to visit real laboratories and meet actual scientists. His dreams of going to college no longer seemed impossible. Victoria had already set up an education fund to make sure he could attend any university he wanted. We'll tour the whole building after the ceremony, she promised. But first, I have something important to tell everyone. The crowd gathered in front of the Learning Center was small but special. There were teachers from Jefferson Elementary, parents from the neighborhood, and dozens of children who had been part of Victoria's reading program. Linda stood in the front row, beaming with pride at her friend's transformation. But there were also some faces from Victoria's old life. Her assistant, Rebecca, was there, along with a few board members from her company. They had watched with amazement as Victoria had gradually shifted her focus from pure profit to meaningful impact. Some had been skeptical at first, but the company was actually doing better than ever. It turned out that having a leader who cared about people made employees work harder and customers feel more loyal. Victoria stepped up to the small podium that had been set up outside the building. She looked out at the faces watching her, rich and poor, young and old, all connected by the belief that education and kindness could change lives. A year ago, Victoria began, I thought I had lost everything that mattered to me. My son David died in a car accident, and I felt like my world had ended. I had more money than I could ever spend, but I felt completely poor because I had lost the person I loved most. She paused, looking at Linda, who nodded encouragingly. I was sitting alone in a diner, feeling sorry for myself when a waitress named Linda did something that changed my life forever. She saw that I was hurting, and instead of leaving me alone with my pain, she chose to care. She sat down with me and listened to my story. She helped me understand that my grief wasn't something to get over. It was love that needed a new place to go. Victoria gestured toward the building behind her. This learning center is where that love is going now. Every child who gets help with reading, every student who discovers they're smart enough for college, every family that gets the support they need, all of this is a way of keeping David's spirit alive. She saw Tyler's face light up at the mention of college, and her heart swelled with hope for his future. But I need to be honest with you about something, Victoria continued. This center isn't really my gift to the community. It's the community's gift to me. These children have taught me what success really means. These families have shown me what wealth really looks like. And this work has given me a reason to get up every morning. Victoria thought about all the changes in her life over the past year. She had stepped back from day-to-day operations at her company, promoting younger leaders who shared her new vision of business as a force for good. She had sold her expensive penthouse and moved to a smaller house in the same neighborhood as the learning center. She still had more money than most people could imagine. But now she measured her wealth by how many lives she could improve rather than how many dollars she could accumulate. David was a teacher, she said, her voice growing stronger. He believed that every child has potential, and that all they need is someone to help them discover it. I spent most of his life thinking that my work in business was more important than his work with children. Now I know I had it backwards. She looked directly at the children in the crowd. You kids have been my teachers this year. You've taught me about courage, curiosity, and the joy of learning something new. You've shown me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's how we grow. And you've reminded me that the best parts of life can't be bought with money. They have to be built with love and patience and time. Mrs. Rodriguez from Jefferson Elementary wiped tears from her eyes. She had watched Victoria transform from a distant volunteer into someone who knew every child's name, every family's struggles, and every small victory worth celebrating. This learning center will be open to any child who needs help, Victoria announced. No family will ever be turned away because they can't afford to pay. But more importantly, every child who comes here will be treated like they matter, like they have something valuable to contribute to the world. After the ceremony, Victoria gave tours of the new building. The science lab made Tyler gasp with excitement. The library was filled with books in multiple languages to serve the diverse neighborhood. The art room had supplies for kids to express themselves creatively. Every space was designed to be welcoming and inspiring, but Victoria's favorite room was the small cafe where parents could wait while their children attended programs. She had modeled it after Miller's Diner, with comfortable booths and the kind of atmosphere where people could have real conversations. Above the coffee machine was a simple sign that read, "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is listen." As the day wound down, Victoria found herself back at Miller's Diner with Linda, just like so many evenings over the past year. But tonight felt different. Instead of a grieving woman seeking comfort, Victoria felt like someone who had found her purpose. "I keep thinking about that first night," Victoria said. "When you decided to sit down with me instead of leaving me alone. That one moment of kindness changed everything." Linda smiled. "You were ready to change, Victoria. I just happened to be there when you needed someone to see your pain." "But that's the thing," Victoria insisted. "You chose to see it. You could have ignored me like everyone else did. You could have decided it wasn't your problem, but you chose compassion instead." They sat quietly for a moment, watching the familiar rhythm of the diner around them. New customers came and went, each carrying their own stories and struggles. Victoria found herself wondering which of them might need someone to notice their pain. "I've been thinking about expanding the learning center model," Victoria said. "Maybe opening similar centers in other cities. But I want to make sure I do it right, with real community involvement, not just throwing money at problems." Linda nodded. "The money is important, but the relationships are what make the real difference. Those kids don't just need tutoring, they need adults who believe in them. Like David believed in his students," Victoria said softly. "And like you believe in them now," Linda replied. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Linda a text message she had received that afternoon. It was from Tyler's father. "Tyler read an entire chapter book this week. He says he wants to be a scientist who helps kids learn. Thank you for showing him that dreams can come true." "This is what David would have wanted," Victoria said, tears in her eyes. "Not some expensive memorial with his name on it, but kids who are getting the chances they deserve." As they prepared to leave the diner, Linda handed Victoria a small wrapped package. "I wanted to give you something to mark this day," she said. Victoria unwrapped it to find a simple photo frame containing a picture of her reading to children at the learning center. Tyler was sitting beside her, pointing at words in a book, both of them smiling. "David may not be here to see who you've become," Linda said, "but I think he knows, and I think he's proud." Victoria hugged her friend, grateful beyond words for the unexpected intervention that had saved her life. She had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or getting over loss. It means finding ways to transform pain into purpose, isolation into connection, and grief into love that reaches beyond yourself. The billionaire who had once measured her worth in dollars had discovered that the most valuable things in life, kindness, compassion, human connection, and the chance to make a difference in someone else's story, couldn't be bought with any amount of money. They could only be built one relationship at a time, one act of caring at a time, one moment of choosing to see and respond to another person's need. And sometimes, those moments happen in the most ordinary places, between the most unlikely people, when someone simply decides that another person's pain matters enough to interrupt their own routine and offer the gift of genuine human kindness.